Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for staying for the last talk. I'm glad you're here because I'm so excited to share with you our work looking at SMS, known to the rest of us in the world as text messaging. So I want to start a discussion of SMS by looking at the network that messages are sent through. And so if you open up a textbook and trying to figure out how text messages work, you're going to see a diagram that looks something like this. Text messages originate at a phone and are sent to a tower who then delivers the message into a network core. And so when we start building systems that rely on SMS, this is the network that we think we see. We think that when we send a text message, it's going to be transmitted through a trusted, secure, isolated network. But the truth is much more complicated. And the network actually looks something much more like this. So this network is vastly more open and much more complicated than we think it is. And in particular, it's possible for computers to send text messages to and from each other without actually ever touching the core network. Now, the upshot of this is that SMS is no longer a simple isolated channel. And so when we build systems that rely on text messaging, things like two-factor solutions, we think that we're using this isolated core network, but we've actually got a much broader attack surface. And so what this work is looking at is what are the security implications of this? In particular, given that we've got such a broad attack surface, what are the implications of what happens when one of these entities, one of these many entities, is eventually compromised? And so to answer this question, we collected a data set of over 300,000 text messages from entities known as public gateways in 28 countries over 14 months. Now, a public gateway is kind of a unique entity. Most of us have never seen one of these. But it's a website, and it looks something like this. At the top, there's a phone number that the website advertises, and it says, send text messages to this phone number, and they appear on this public website. And so you can kind of think of this as kind of a proto-Twitter, where messages are sent and posted publicly. And now these websites advertise themselves as a way to get a text message, maybe when your phone isn't working, or when you want to avoid spam or unwanted callers. And so we collected this data, and we're going to talk about the uses and abuses that we find in this data. So before we dive deeper, though, I want to talk just briefly about some of the ethical considerations we addressed. In particular, our paper features an extensive ethics discussion, and so if you've got any questions about the work that we did, we encourage you to take a look at that. I'm also available offline all this week to answer and have any discussions you might have. So the bulk of this data is sent to gateways by institutions. So we're talking about text messages sent from the Googles and Facebooks of the world. The data does, of course, include some personal messages and some messages containing sensitive information. Now, for the purposes of this research, it's important to understand that this is already public data made available on the web to anyone who goes to look at it. And it's clear to users that this data will always be public. And it's important to understand that messages that arrive at these gateways only arrive there because some user at some point said, this number, which actually posts publicly, I claim as my number. So that said, the most important thing to understand about the ethics of this research is that we cannot and do not attempt to de-anonymize, track, identify, exploit, or otherwise use the personal information of any users. And our analyses explicitly exclude personal messages. So what we're really looking at this study is how institutions are using SMS. So let's take a look at one of the most popular uses of SMS data, and that is for one-time passwords and verification codes, commonly seen in two-factor solutions. So one of the questions that we had was, are these systems using good randomness when they send out a PIN? And so to answer this question, we generated a heat map that looks something like this for several of our services. And what we did was we divided the 4-digit PIN space into a two-dimensional coordinate space. Your first 2 digits are on the vertical axis. Your final 2 digits are along the horizontal axis. And the darkness of the color indicates how many pins that we received of that particular value. And so this is a plot from the instant messaging service line. And as you can see, the pin distribution is pretty random, except that they never use a leading 0. This was likely a usability decision that their engineers made. Let's contrast that with another service. This is WeChat, a popular instant messaging client in China. As you can see, this isn't as random as we would like to see. In fact, what's happening is you see this very clear constellation of pins because the four least significant bits of the random number generator are constant. And this is a fairly common problem in poorly implemented random number generators. Fortunately, towards the end of our data collection, they actually changed the random number generator and are doing better now. But for a time, they were only using 625 pins. Another service that we found is Talk2, and this is an over-the-top messaging provider in the Philippines, so sort of like a Philippine WhatsApp. And as you can see here, they are failing to use over half of the pin space. And we're not sure what design decisions led to this particular pattern, but it's obvious that it's a problem. So in total, we looked at 33 different services, and we found that 13 services failed to send a random code each message. Now, not all of these services have bad messages. Some of them, for example, will cache a previously used pin and resend it. So, for example, if they send a pin and you don't receive it, or you don't receive it in a timely fashion, they don't change the pin, they just resend the old one. And as a result, the messages don't always pass statistical randomness tests. Let's look at some other examples of misuse of the SMS channel. And in particular, let's look at some sensitive information that's being sent in the clear over text messages. So these included things like password reset links, where to reset your password, all you have to do is receive a text message and click a link. Now, this is problematic because with this one link, any user can, who has this message can actually click this link and recover the account. Similarly, we found usernames and passwords being sent in the clear, names and addresses, and worst of all, credit card numbers being distributed over SMS by banks. Now, these are instances of not only the credit card numbers, but the expiration dates and CVV codes. So everything that you need to make a purchase in a single text message. Now, the point to take away from this is that all of these messages are being sent by institutions to users containing extremely sensitive information over a channel they believe to be secure, but actually has a broad attack surface with few security guarantees. So we also had some insight into other behaviors in our data, especially certain types of abuse. So, for example, we saw that 1% of our messages we were able to label as spam. And we also identified one long-running phishing campaign that would send you a message indicating that your lost iPhone had been found. And all you had to do was enter your iCloud credentials into their website to find your lost iPhone. They were sending this by text message. I'm not sure what exactly their goal was here. But the ultimate takeaway is that malicious SMS activity is a real but a relatively small phenomenon. If you're interested in this kind of work, we actually have a follow-up paper appearing at WISEC in July. So many services are now requesting a working phone number when an account is created. And this is one of the reasons they do this is to limit account creation for fraud and abuse. And so this is known as phone verified accounts. And in this work, we found that many, if not most, of our gateway users are actively circumventing phone-verified accounts. In fact, some of the gateways themselves advertise this as one of their features. One of the reasons we know this is that we could see that messages to numbers located in countries were often viewed outside of those countries. So a text message delivered to a number in the United States might be read by someone in Iran. We were able to see this because many of these messages contained URL-shortened links, things like bit.ly, that provide aggregated statistics publicly that we were able to take a look at. And I do want to make it clear that we only saw country-level data with this study. But this is evidence that folks are using these gateway services as a means of evading geofencing and implemented by phone-verified accounts. Another piece of evidence that we found was that the lifetime of an account was strongly indicative of use of phone-verified account evasion. So we know this because when a new number is posted online, we can see that there's a sharp spike in the message volume. So there's a huge number of messages followed by a steep drop-off. Because what's happening is individuals are browsing to this website to see a new phone number is available. They go and register as many accounts as they can with that number until the number no longer works for new accounts. And then we see a rapid drop-off in messages delivered to that particular phone number. So understanding that this is a problem and it's being facilitated by these gateways, we wanted to know, is there anything that we could do to prevent phone-verified accounts? And so trying our best to be good researchers, we went and looked at the literature and found that there had been a prior study looking at phone-verified accounts that made several recommendations on ways to stop this practice. And so in particular, that work that appeared at CCS 2 years ago suggested 3 defenses. The first of these was to have users re-verify often. So instead of giving a phone number once and then having to receive a PIN code at that number once, have them do it, say, every day or 2. The thinking being that phone numbers are expensive and you pay perhaps by the day, and so this would greatly increase the cost to the attacker. But what we found was that in our data set, our numbers had a lifetime of over 20 days as the median. Some lasted over a year. And so what that means is that on average, your fraudster is going to be able to afford at least 20 days of fraud with his new accounts before needing to shut them down. The second suggestion was to block numbers in low reputation carriers. The thinking being that numbers that are provided by brand name telcos, your T-Mobiles and Vodafones of the world, are going to be different from maybe a fly-by-night VoIP carrier. But what we found was that most of our gateway numbers are in common reputable carriers. And so what that means is that blocking reputation is unlikely to be a very successful strategy long term. The third suggestion was blocking similar numbers. So the thinking being that if I am a fraudster and I need to acquire a large number of phone numbers, I'm going to buy them in blocks where the numbers are similar, and therefore, as an institution, when I am trying to block this fraud, I can take a look at a known bad number and block numbers that are similar. But what we found was that 40% of our numbers were similar, but only in the most reputable mobile carriers, meaning that if you were to try to use number similarity as a metric, you'd be likely to suffer a high false positive rate because that's where your most legitimate users are going to be. And so the takeaway from this is that phone-verified account evasion is still very much an open problem, and it's going to be hard to detect or prevent. So I have 3 main takeaways from this paper. The first of which is that online gateways like these can give us insight into how text messages are used and abused in this modern SMS ecosystem. The second is that organizations regularly use text messages as a secure channel for sensitive information, despite the fact that there are limited guarantees and high risks of compromise. And the final takeaway is that gateway data provides insights into spam, phishing, and phone-verified account fraud. And so with that, I want to thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to take your questions now.
Please. Yes, what makes you think that the carriers that are, the institutions that are sending messages, you asserted that they think it's secure. What leads you to believe that?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the end of the question.
What makes you think that the senders think the channel is secure? You asserted that.
Well, whether or not they actually believe the channel is secure, they're treating it as such by entrusting it with sensitive information. So, we're inferring intent here, but in practice, the results are the same. Banks are still sending credit card numbers over text messages.